Hi all, I'm Dr. Clark here again with another general biology lecture. Today we're going to talk about macromolecules. Okay? Macromolecules, sometimes called polymers, sometimes called biomolecules. Okay? They're really the building blocks of life. Okay? And this gentleman right here that's pictured here is Hermann Staudinger, or Dr. Hermann Staudinger, okay? And he won the Nobel Prize in 1953 for discovering macromolecules. At the time, he called them polymers, and it's kind of interchangeable, the term macromolecules and polymers, okay? But his work in chemistry really kind of paved the way for macromolecule or analysis of macromolecules. And so we really owe Staudinger a little bit of credit for looking at these large molecules that build up systems in biology. Okay, and we'll talk about 4 specific ones as we progress through this material. Okay, today I just want to give you kind of an overview of what makes up a macromolecule, how are they made, what bonds are formed, and kind of that general process. Okay. So if we look at polymers or macromolecules, they're built of monomers, smaller subunits. Okay, and so organic molecules form living organisms, and they are combined, or for lack of a better term, made by living organisms. Remember, energy, matter is not created nor destroyed. Okay, it's just converted. Okay, so living organisms have the capability of taking very simplistic elements, okay, or small molecules, and building them into much larger molecules. Okay? So taking monomers and building them into polymers. Okay? And then they can be utilized for many different things. In some cases, they're utilized for energy, when we talk about things like carbohydrates. In other cases, they might be used to build muscle, okay, or tissue levels, okay, when we talk about proteins. Some cases they're utilized to code for those proteins or those amino acid chains, and we talk about DNA in that case. And sometimes they're used for very long time storage, or a water barrier in the case of things like lipids. Okay? And so we're going to go through quite a few different macromolecules or polymers or biomolecules, whichever term you really want to utilize, in the next coming lectures. Okay? So one thing that they all have, all organic molecules, and this is pertinent for individuals who might be moving through the biology series and through the chemistry series. When you move through the chemistry series, you'll eventually go to organic chemistry. The organic portion of chemistry, that course or those courses, okay, are about these kind of molecules, organic molecules. So they will all have some carbon-based core. Okay? That can be in the form of a chain, a ring. Okay? It can take many different shapes and forms, but nonetheless, they all have a carbon-based core. Now, the carbon-based core is not really what gives the molecule its unique properties, okay? Because you'll have lots of molecules that have the same, or generally the same, carbon-based core or carbon-based ring. Okay? It's the functional groups, it's the attachments to that chain or ring, okay, that really gives some kind of chemical property. Okay? So it might be, what's hanging off the last carbon, okay? Or, how many different hydroxide groups do you have hanging off carbons? And these kind of things will give the unique property to that organic molecule. Sometimes making them polar, sometimes making them non-polar, okay? And we'll look at these examples as we progress through the lectures. But here are some of the functional groups that are really important for biology. We would call these, biochemicals or biomolecules. So therefore, these are biofunctional groups. Okay, and they're extremely important for different systems when it comes to living organisms. Okay, hydroxyl or hydroxide group. Okay, that would indicate or is often found in carbohydrates. Okay, carbohydrates is a kind of a fancy term for sugars. Okay, carbonyl groups are found in lipids. Okay, carboxyl groups found in proteins. Amino groups are also found in proteins. Okay, and you can have very complex proteins that have both carboxyl and amino groups, and in some cases many carboxyl and amino groups. Okay, and then a phosphate group, okay, which we find in DNA and ATP. Okay, and if you remember from maybe high school biology or high school environmental science and things like that, ATP is just another way that we express energy. It's a currency of our cells. Okay, so adenosine triphosphate is the currency of our cells. So when we talk about phosphate groups, it's important for information carrying molecules and energy for the cell. So when we look at these macromolecules, okay, that are constructed by living organisms, they can be extremely complex. Okay? And the more complex they are, typically the harder they are to break down. But also, along with that, if it's an energy source, the more energy that molecule has, more potential energy that molecule has. So large macromolecules with lots of bonds. Okay, remember, each one of those bonds indicates a energy source or potential energy. Okay, and so if you can cleave those bonds, you can get a lot of energy from these large macromolecules. Not all macromolecules are about energy, though. Okay, there are 4 types of macromolecules, or 4 types of biomolecules. Okay, and they're listed here: proteins, okay, nucleic acids, which is kind of a fancy term for DNA, RNA, okay, carbohydrates, fancy term for sugars, and lipids, which is kind of a fancy term for fats. Okay, but those general things like fats and sugars and things like that, that's not actually all that a carbohydrate is, or all that a lipid is, or all that a nucleic acid is. We'll go through each one of these groups in later lectures, so you can be confident in what we call a carbohydrate, and now you know exactly what that is. It's not just glucose, it's not just sucrose, table sugar. Okay, they're much more complex than that, okay, and are building blocks of lots of organisms. Okay, but like we said before, macromolecules or polymers are made of or constructed of monomers, simpler, smaller components. Okay, and this goes for everything that we know. Okay? We've talked about this before in beginning lectures. Atoms are linked together to make a molecule. Molecules are linked together to make macromolecules. Macromolecules are linked together to make, organelles, and then organelles are linked together to make cells, and on and on and on. Okay, and we're just in that macromolecule point of view right now. They're constructed of many monomers at times. Okay, so when you combine a bunch of monomers, okay, we then call that chain or that ring or whatever the structure it is that it takes a polymer. Okay? And all polymers are assembled the same way. Okay? And that is, a covalent bond is formed between one monomer that ends in a hydroxyl group and another monomer that ends in a hydrogen. Okay? And so you have one monomer with a hydroxyl group ending, one monomer with a hydrogen ending, and they're coming together. Okay? When they come together, that hydroxyl group and hydrogen group form water. Okay? And water is removed from the equation. Okay? Energy has to be supplied in order for the bond to form, typically between carbon and another element on one of the monomers. Okay? Sometimes that's nitrogen, sometimes that's oxygen. It just depends on what type of molecule we're talking about. Okay? But nonetheless, water is being removed. We call these dehydration synthesis or dehydration reactions because water is being removed. The hydroxyl group, hydrogen group are combining, okay, to form water. Is being removed. Energy is being added to form the bond between the two monomers to make a polymer. So here you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so this monomer ends in a hydroxyl group. This monomer ends in a hydrogen. They come together, form water. Water leaves. Okay, so the hydrogen hydroxyl group are now in this molecule. Okay. Energy is supplied to form this bond here. Okay. So we're going to watch a quick little video that demonstrates this in more of a three-dimensional molecular shape. Okay. So there you can see. Okay, we can watch it again real quick. Okay, we've talked about this molecule or the forming of this molecule before. We have glucose on one side, fructose on the other side. They come together. Okay? Water is created or formed from the hydroxyl group of one and the hydrogen group of the other. Okay? Water is formed. It's not showing the energy supplied, but we have to supply some energy to form this bond between these two molecules. That makes a macromolecule, okay? And in this case it's making sucrose. Okay? So with that, at further reactions, so now you form polymers, but how do you break them up? How do you get the energy back from them? So a plant has made glucose and fructose and combined it to make sucrose. And we can just talk about, sugar cane. Sucrose is what table sugar is. Okay, so we can talk about sugar beets, sugar cane, and there's lots of plants that make sucrose. Okay? We then would take that bag of sugar, and you might, eat some. Okay? Put it in something, whatever, coffee, blah blah blah. It doesn't really matter. Okay, that sucrose would then go into your stomach and encounter enzymes called sucrase, and those enzymes called sucrase would grab the sucrose molecule and change its shape just a little bit, just enough for water to come in and break the bond between the two molecules, between glucose and fructose. Okay? So we're going to reverse the dehydration synthesis, okay, by adding water to break the covalent bond between the two monomers. Okay? That's known as hydrolysis. Okay? And so then you can see a demonstration of that here. Okay, so it's just the opposite of dehydration reactions. We're adding water. It's breaking the sucrose. We could assume this is a sucrose molecule here. Okay, so we're assuming this is the sucrose molecule. It's adding water, breaks that molecule. Energy is released, okay, because we broke a bond. Okay, and now you have a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule. Or really, it doesn't matter what we're talking about here. All macromolecules are formed the same way. So we could be talking about breaking up a protein into smaller amino acid groups. We could be talking about breaking up lipids. okay, into fatty acid chains. Okay? We could be talking about breaking DNA into nucleotides. We could be talking about breaking carbohydrates into simple sugars, monosaccharides. Okay? And so that's the general premise behind forming macromolecules and disassembling macromolecules. Okay? So next lecture, we're going to talk about specific macromolecules. Okay? What are their properties? What components are needed to assemble them? And then, are they used as energy sources? Are they used as building blocks? Are they used as both? What's going on? And what's the purpose in life? Okay? All right, so next time, macromolecules, specific ones.